The sun was slowly dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The calm waters of Lake Willow shimmered under the fading light, creating a scene so peaceful it felt like time itself had slowed down. Ethan sat on his weathered Adirondack chair, leaning back with a content sigh. This was his favorite part of the day, just him, the lake, and the quiet hum of nature around him. His cabin wasn't fancy. It was rustic, built by hand over years of weekends and holidays. But to Ethan, it was perfect, a place where he could escape the noise and stress of city life. Ethan had inherited this land from his grandfather, who used to talk about how special this spot was. It wasn't just any patch of earth. It held memories, stories, and the sense of belonging that no amount of money could buy. Over the years, Ethan had added his own touches: a sturdy wooden shed, a fire pit near the water's edge, and a neatly stacked woodpile for chilly nights. Everything here told a story, from the cracks in the porch boards to the old fishing rod hanging inside the cabin. But peace is often fragile, especially when you live in a community governed by a homeowners association, or HOA, as everyone called it. These groups are supposed to keep neighborhoods running smoothly, but sometimes they attract people more interested in control than cooperation. And today, Ethan was about to meet one such person face to face. The sound of heels crunching against gravel broke the silence. Ethan looked up to see a woman striding toward his property line. She was dressed sharply, her sunglasses perched high on her nose like armor shielding her from the world. In her hands, she clutched a clipboard, which she waved dramatically as if it were some kind of official decree. Her presence was loud, even before she spoke. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the evening stillness. "Are you the owner of this establishment?" Ethan raised an eyebrow at the word establishment, but nodded politely. "That's right, I'm Ethan. How can I help you?" She stepped closer, stopping just short of crossing onto his property. "I'm Karen," she announced, full of authority. "I represent the Homeowners Association for Willow Lake Estates." She paused, letting the title sink in, then continued. "We've received complaints about your woodpile. It's unsightly and violates Section 3.2(c) of our guidelines." Ethan blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "My woodpile?" he repeated, glancing at the stack of logs near the shed. They were arranged neatly, almost artistically, if he did say so himself. He couldn't imagine what someone might find offensive about them. Karen flipped open her clipboard, pointing to a page filled with tiny print. "It clearly states here that all exterior structures must maintain a certain aesthetic standard. Your woodpile does not comply." Ethan fought the urge to laugh. Aesthetic standards? For firewood? Still, he kept his tone friendly. "Look, I understand there are rules, but this is private property. My family has owned this land for generations." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, clearly unimpressed. "Be that as it may, we have regulations to uphold. If you don't remove the woodpile within 48 hours, further action will be taken." "Further action?" Ethan echoed, now genuinely curious. "What exactly does that mean?" Her smile was tight, almost predatory. "Let's just say you wouldn't want to find out." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her car, leaving Ethan sitting there, slightly baffled. As her engine roared to life and she drove away, he shook his head, chuckling softly. People like Karen always seemed to think they could throw their weight around. But little did she know, she'd picked the wrong battle this time. Still, as the sun dipped lower and the shadows grew longer, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning. Something told him Karen wasn't the type to give up easily, not without putting up a fight. And while he didn't relish the idea of conflict, the next couple of days passed quietly, almost too quietly. Ethan went about his usual routine, fixing a loose board on the porch, chopping a few more logs for the woodpile, and taking long walks along the lake to clear his mind. But despite the calm, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Karen wasn't done. Her parting words echoed in his head. Asterisk, you wouldn't want to find out. Whatever her further action was, it was bound to be dramatic. Sure enough, 2 days later, the tranquility of the lakeside was shattered by the unmistakable wail of sirens. Ethan was sitting inside the cabin, nursing a cup of coffee, when he heard the commotion outside. He stepped onto the porch just in time to see 2 police cruisers pulling into his driveway, lights flashing. Behind them, Karen's pristine white SUV rolled in like the grand finale of a parade. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, looking every bit the self-appointed enforcer she believed herself to be. This is it, Ethan muttered under his breath, shaking his head. He grabbed his jacket and headed outside to meet the officers as they approached. One of the officers, a tall man with a kind face, spoke first. Sir, we received a call about a possible trespasser on this property. Can you confirm if you're the owner? Ethan nodded, keeping his tone calm and respectful. I am. This is my land, and I've been here for years. Karen interrupted, stepping forward with her usual flair for drama. That's not entirely accurate, she exclaimed, pointing at Ethan as if she were presenting evidence in court. This man refuses to comply with our HOA guidelines. He's been warned multiple times, but he continues to violate community standards. His so-called woodpile is an eyesore and a hazard. The officer glanced between Ethan and Karen, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. Ma'am, are you saying he doesn't own this property? Karen hesitated for a moment, then quickly recovered. Well, technically, yes, he claims to own it. But he's ignoring the rules. And let me tell you, these aren't just my rules, they're the rules of the entire Willow Lake Estates community. Ethan crossed his arms, smiling faintly. It's funny she mentioned technically, he said, addressing the officers. Because technically, I do own this property. In fact, he turned and walked back into the cabin, returning moments later with a folder stuffed with papers. Here's proof. He handed the folder to the officer, who flipped through it. Curiously, inside were deeds, titles, and legal documents proving Ethan's ownership, not just of the cabin and its immediate surroundings, but of vast swaths of land stretching far beyond what anyone could see. The final document sealed the deal, a map showing that Ethan owned the entire county where Lake Willow was located. The officer whistled softly, clearly impressed. Looks like you've got quite the estate here, sir. Karen's face turned bright red, her confidence crumbling as she realized the gravity of the situation. But that can't be right, she stammered. No one person can own all this land. It's absurd. Ethan shrugged, unfazed. Believe me, I get that reaction a lot, but it's all legit. You're welcome to double-check with the county clerk if you'd like. The officers exchanged glances, then turned to Karen. Ma'am, unless you have any other concerns or evidence to present, it seems this matter is resolved. Karen opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she stood there, fuming silently as the officers climbed back into their cruisers and drove away. For a moment, Ethan thought she might storm off too, but instead, she planted her hands on her hips and glared at him. You think this is over? She snapped, her voice dripping with venom. You may have your little papers, but mark my words, I'm not giving up. Not until you follow the rules like everyone else. Ethan sighed, leaning casually against the porch railing. Look, I get it. You care about the neighborhood, and that's fine. But maybe take a step back and ask yourself why you're so worked up about a pile of firewood. Is it really worth all this energy? Karen didn't respond. She simply spun around, marched back to her SUV, and sped off, leaving skid marks on the gravel driveway. Ethan watched her go, shaking his head. He knew better than to expect peace after this encounter. People like Karen thrived on conflict, and backing down wasn't in their nature. If anything, this confrontation would only fuel her determination. To Wyandotte, as the dust settled and silence returned to the lakeside, Ethan found himself reflecting on the absurdity of it all. He had never asked for trouble. All he wanted was to enjoy his cabin and live his life without interference. But sometimes, trouble came knocking anyway, whether you invited it or not. Still, Ethan felt a strange sense of satisfaction. There was something oddly empowering about standing your ground, especially when someone tried to push you around. He had the law and the paperwork on his side, and that gave him confidence. No matter what Karen threw at him next, he was ready. Back. Inside the cabin, Ethan poured himself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, gazing out at the lake. The sun was climbing higher now, casting golden light across the water. It was hard to believe such beauty could exist alongside so much unnecessary drama. But life was funny that way. It always found a way to balance the peaceful with the chaotic. As he sipped his coffee, Ethan chuckled softly. "Round one goes to me," he murmured to himself. "But something tells me Karen's not the type to quit after one loss." And deep down, he knew she'd be back. The days that followed Karen's embarrassing defeat were anything but quiet. If Ethan thought showing her the paperwork would put an end to things, he was sorely mistaken. Karen wasn't the type to back down, not when she believed she was in the right, and definitely not when her pride had taken such a hit. Instead of retreating, she came back with a vengeance, determined to prove that Ethan's ownership of the land didn't give him free rein to ignore what she saw as community standards. It started small. A few anonymous complaints filed with local authorities about noise violations or improper waste disposal. None of them stuck, of course. Ethan kept his cabin clean, respected the environment, and rarely made enough noise to disturb even the squirrels. But Karen wasn't deterred. She doubled down, escalating her campaign in ways that left Ethan both amused and slightly annoyed. One morning, Ethan woke up to find signs posted along the dirt road leading to his cabin. The bright yellow placards read, "Private property no. Trespassing." At first glance, they seemed legitimate, but something about them felt off. For one thing, Ethan didn't remember putting them up. And for another, the wording implied that people needed permission to visit, even though this was his property, and he'd never turned anyone away who came in peace. Curious, Ethan tore one of the signs down and examined it more closely. There was no official logo or contact information, just bold letters printed on cheap paper. It didn't take long to figure out who was behind this latest stunt. Who else would go to such lengths to make life difficult for him? Rather than get angry, Ethan decided to play along. He grabbed some plywood from his shed and painted a massive sign of his own. In bold black letters, it read, "Welcome to Carter. County population, me." Below that, he added smaller text, "Trespassers will be politely ignored." He propped the sign near his driveway where it was impossible to miss. When Karen drove by later that day, her face turned beet red as she scowled at the message. Mission accomplished, but Karen wasn't done yet. Over the next few weeks, her antics grew increasingly ridiculous. She sent letters to every neighbor within a 5-mile radius, warning them about Ethan's supposed disregard for HOA rules. She held impromptu meetings at the community center, rallying anyone willing to listen. Some neighbors listened politely, but ultimately shrugged it off. They liked Ethan well enough and didn't see how his woodpile affected them. Others, however, began siding with Karen, convinced that Ethan was flaunting his wealth and power. Rumors spread like wildfire. Someone claimed Ethan charged exorbitant fees for access to the lake, which wasn't true. He let anyone fish or swim for free. Another whispered that he planned to bulldoze the entire area and build a luxury resort, also false. The more outrageous the stories became, the more divided the neighborhood grew. Old friendships frayed, tempers flared, and what had once been a tight-knit community started to crack under the weight of Karen's crusade. Ethan tried to stay above the fray, focusing on his work and enjoying the beauty of his lakeside retreat. But even he couldn't ignore the tension brewing around him. One evening, as he sat by the fire pit roasting marshmallows, he heard voices approaching. A group of neighbors had gathered near the edge of his property, debating loudly about whether they should confront him directly. Why doesn't he just follow the rules like everyone else? One man grumbled. He's not hurting anyone, another countered. Leave him alone, Ethan sighed, setting his stick aside. He walked over to greet them, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Hey, folks, he said warmly. What's going on? The group fell silent, suddenly awkward. Finally, one woman spoke up. We're just concerned about the HOA guidelines. We don't want problems in the neighborhood. Ethan nodded, understanding their unease. I get it. Change can be scary, especially when someone new or different comes into the picture. But here's the thing. I've lived here longer than most of you. This land has been in my family for generations. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm just living my life. His words seemed to soften some of the skeptics, but others remained unconvinced. As the group dispersed, Ethan returned to his fire pit, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. He hadn't asked for this drama, but it was clear that Karen's influence ran deep. She had managed to turn what should have been a simple disagreement into a full-blown neighborhood feud. As the weeks dragged on, Ethan noticed subtle changes in the way people treated him. Some avoided eye contact when they passed his cabin. Others gave him frosty smiles or muttered under their breath. But not everyone turned against him. A handful of neighbors, those who valued kindness over conflict, began stopping by unannounced, bringing homemade pies or offering help with chores. These small acts of solidarity meant more to Ethan than he could express. One afternoon, an older man named Tom stopped by with a cooler full of fresh trout. Caught these this morning, he said with a grin. Thought you might enjoy them. Ethan thanked him, touched by the gesture. You didn't have to do this, he said. Tom shrugged. Karen's got everyone riled up, but that doesn't mean we all agree with her. You've always been good to us, and we appreciate it. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, fishing spots, weather patterns, and memories of summers spent by the lake. By the time Tom left, Ethan felt a renewed sense of hope. No matter how much Karen tried to divide them, there were still good people in the world who chose kindness over judgment. Despite the growing tension, Ethan refused to let Karen ruin his love for this place. Every morning, he woke up to the sound of birds chirping and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. He spent his days fixing things around the cabin, exploring the woods, and watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. Life went on, even if it wasn't as peaceful as before. But deep down, Ethan knew Karen wouldn't stop until she found a way to win, or at least to strike a blow that would humiliate him publicly. Her obsession with control bordered on unhinged, and sooner or later, she'd cross a line she couldn't come back from. Late one night, as Ethan lay in bed listening to the wind rustle through the trees, he realized something important. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. It was about showing the people around him that kindness and respect mattered more than rules and regulations. And most of all, it was about proving that no amount of pettiness could overshadow the beauty of this place or the strength of a community willing to stand together. Little did Ethan know, Karen's next move would change everything for better or worse. The tension between Ethan and Karen had been simmering for weeks, but no one, not even Ethan, could have predicted how far Karen would go to win. It was a chilly autumn night when things finally came to a head. The kind of night where the air feels crisp against your skin and the stars above seem brighter than usual. Ethan had spent the evening reading by the fire, enjoying the quiet solitude that he loved so much about his cabin. He'd banked the fire before heading to bed. Leaving only faint embers glowing in the hearth dot around midnight, something woke him up, a strange crackling sound outside. At first, he thought it might be branches snapping in the wind or an animal rummaging through the woods, but then he smelled it, smoke. Thick, acrid smoke that burned his nostrils and made his heart race. Ethan bolted out of bed, throwing on jeans and a jacket as he rushed to the door. When he stepped outside, the scene hit him like a punch to the gut. Flames were licking hungrily at the edges of his woodpile, climbing higher with each passing second. Sparks flew into the air, carried by the breeze, threatening to ignite nearby. Trees. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. This wasn't just firewood, it was winter fuel, painstakingly gathered over months. If the blaze spread, it could reach the shed, the cabin, or worse, the surrounding forest. Grabbing the garden hose and a fire extinguisher from inside, Ethan sprang into action. He soaked the area around the flames, trying to create a barrier to stop them from spreading. His hands trembled as he worked, not just from adrenaline but from anger too. Someone had done this deliberately. There was no way a fire like this could start on its own. It took nearly half an hour, but eventually Ethan managed to douse the flames. The woodpile was charred and ruined, reduced to smoldering ash and blackened logs. Smoke still hung heavy in the air as he stood there, catching his breath and staring at the destruction. That's when he noticed something glinting near the base of the pile, a small metal lighter. Picking it up, Ethan felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. This wasn't random vandalism. This was personal. The next morning, Ethan reviewed the footage from the security cameras he'd installed months earlier. He hadn't thought much of them at the time. They were mostly there to keep an eye on wildlife, but now they proved invaluable. As he fast-forwarded through hours of empty footage, his jaw tightened. Just after midnight, a figure appeared on screen. The person moved quickly, staying low and keeping to the shadows. They carried something in their hands, something small and metallic. A lighter. When the figure stepped into the light cast by the porch lamp, Ethan's suspicions were confirmed. It was Karen. Dressed in dark clothes, her face partially hidden under a baseball cap, she looked almost unrecognizable. But there was no mistaking her posture, the way she carried herself with that same self-righteous determination Ethan had seen countless times before. She crouched beside the woodpile, flicked the lighter, and touched the flame to the dry logs. Then, without hesitation, she turned and hurried back toward her car, parked just out of view. Ethan sat back in his chair, stunned. He'd suspected Karen's involvement in the petty complaints and signs, but arson? This was a whole new level of obsession. He knew what he had to do next, but the thought of escalating things further left a bitter taste in his mouth. Still, he couldn't let this slide. Setting fire to someone's property wasn't just malicious, it was dangerous. One strong gust of wind, and the entire forest could have gone up in flames. Armed with the video evidence, Ethan called the local sheriff's department. Within an hour, 2 deputies arrived at his cabin. They surveyed the damage, took photos, and listened intently as Ethan explained what had happened. When he showed them the footage, their expressions shifted from skepticism to disbelief. "Are you sure you want to press charges?" One of the deputies asked cautiously. "This is going to get ugly." Ethan nodded firmly. "I'm sure." What she did wasn't just reckless, it was criminal. I can't let her think this kind of behavior is okay." Reluctantly, the deputies agreed to investigate further. By the end of the day, news of Karen's arrest had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, whispering about the dramatic turn of events. Some were horrified, unable to believe that Karen loudmouthed, pushy Karen had stooped so low. Others weren't surprised at all, muttering that this was exactly the kind of thing she'd do if pushed far enough. Karen, meanwhile, refused to admit guilt. When confronted with the video, she claimed it was fake, edited to frame her. "He's rich," she shouted during a heated exchange with the HOA board. "He probably hired someone to make that tape." Her denials fell flat, especially once the deputies confirmed the authenticity of the footage. Facing mounting pressure, Karen resigned from the HOA board later that week. But quitting didn't mean backing down. Instead, she launched a public campaign to salvage her reputation, accusing Ethan of harassment and manipulation. She posted lengthy rants on social media, held impromptu meetings in the community center, and even contacted local reporters to share her side of the story. At first, some neighbors rallied behind her, convinced that Ethan must have played dirty to trap her. But as more details emerged, including the fact that Karen had been caught on camera red-handed, public opinion began to shift. People who had once feared crossing her started speaking out, sharing stories of how she'd bullied or intimidated them in the past. Even Tom, the neighbor who'd brought Ethan fresh trout, admitted that Karen had pressured him into signing a petition against Ethan months earlier. For Ethan, the fallout was exhausting but also strangely validating. For years, he'd kept to himself, avoiding conflict whenever possible. Now, faced with Karen's relentless attacks, he realized that sometimes standing your ground meant inspiring others to do the same. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. Neighbors who had initially sided with Karen began apologizing to Ethan, bringing gifts or offering help with repairs. Others simply stopped by to chat, eager to reconnect after months of division. Evening, as Ethan sat by the fire pit roasting marshmallows, he found himself surrounded by a small group of neighbors. They laughed and joked, sharing stories about their own run-ins with Karen. One woman confessed that Karen had once reported her for having too many flower pots on her porch. Another man said she'd threatened to fine him for parking his boat trailer in his driveway overnight. "I don't know how you put up with her for so long," the woman said, shaking her head. "Most people would have lost it by now." Ethan chuckled, flipping a marshmallow over the flames. "Honestly, I didn't think it would escalate like this. But I guess some people just can't handle being told no." As the night wore on, Ethan felt a renewed sense of hope. The fire may have destroyed his woodpile, but it had also exposed the truth and brought the community closer together in unexpected ways. Not everyone was ready to forgive and forget, but enough people had seen through Karen's lies to make a difference. Still, Ethan knew this wasn't the end. Karen wouldn't give up easily, and he braced himself for whatever came next. But for now, sitting under the stars with good company and laughter filling the air, he allowed himself a moment of peace. Whatever storms lay ahead, he felt ready to face them one step at a time. The dust had barely settled after Karen's arrest when the full weight of her actions began to sink in for both her and the community. Facing criminal charges for arson and trespassing, Karen's once imposing presence crumbled under the scrutiny of public opinion. The HOA board distanced themselves from her entirely, issuing a formal apology to Ethan and urging residents to focus on unity rather than division. But Karen wasn't ready to fade quietly into the background. Instead, she doubled down, spinning her version of events in increasingly desperate attempts to salvage her reputation. She started attending town hall meetings, standing up to accuse Ethan of harassment and manipulation. Her voice trembled with emotion as she claimed he had set her up, planting evidence to frame her. "He's using his wealth and influence to ruin me," she declared during one particularly heated session, but her theatrics fell flat. Neighbors exchanged skeptical glances, and even those who had once feared crossing her seemed unmoved. The video footage was undeniable, and Karen's refusal to take responsibility only deepened the divide between her and the rest of the community. Eventually, the backlash became too much for her to bear. Rumors spread that she'd put her house on the market, eager to escape the whispers and judgmental stares. Within weeks, a moving truck pulled out of her driveway, loaded with boxes and furniture. No one knew exactly where she wants them said. Another gated community farther away. Others joked she'd probably taken over as president of their HOA within days, but one thing was certain. Karen Wilkins was gone. For Ethan, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after such a whirlwind. The fire had left its mark, not just on his property, but on the neighborhood itself. People who had once avoided him now stopped by regularly, bringing pies, offering help with repairs, or simply sharing stories around his outdoor fire pit. These small acts of kindness reminded Ethan of what truly mattered: connection, understanding, and a willingness to stand together despite differences. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled in the breeze, Ethan decided it was time to rebuild. He invited a few neighbors to help construct a new woodpile near the shed. What started as a practical task quickly turned into a lively gathering. Someone brought a portable speaker, filling the air with music. Others pitched in snacks and drinks, turning the workday into an impromptu celebration. Laughter echoed across the lake as old grudges melted away, replaced by shared purpose and camaraderie. As they worked side by side, Ethan noticed something remarkable. Conversations flowed freely, unburdened by the tension that had gripped the neighborhood for months. People talked about everything: their families, their jobs, their dreams for the future. Even Tom, the neighbor who'd brought trout earlier in the year, admitted he'd been hesitant to speak up against Karen before. "I guess I thought no one else would," he said with a sheepish grin. "But seeing you stand your ground, it gave us all courage." By the end of the day, the new woodpile stood tall and sturdy, a testament to collaboration and resilience. Ethan looked around at the faces of his neighbors, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling nearby. For so long, he'd kept to himself, content to live quietly and avoid conflict. Now, he realized how much richer life could be when you opened your door and your heart to others. In the months that followed, Ethan noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. Without Karen's constant interference, people seemed more relaxed, more willing to connect. Spontaneous gatherings became common, whether it was a potluck dinner or a weekend fishing trip. The animosity Karen had stirred up faded, replaced by a renewed sense of community spirit. Ethan played his part. 2. He hosted an annual barbecue at the cabin, inviting everyone, including former adversaries, to celebrate unity over division. The event quickly became a tradition, drawing crowds from miles around. Kids chased each other through the woods while adults swapped tales of past summers spent by the lake. At sunset, Ethan raised a glass to toast the crowd. "Here's to second chances," he said, smiling, "and to proving that we're stronger together than apart." Meanwhile, rumors about Karen continued to circulate. Some claimed she'd moved to a luxury condo complex, where she immediately clashed with management over parking regulations. Others swore they'd seen her shouting at a landscaper for trimming bushes too aggressively. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories served as a reminder of the absurdity of her crusade and the importance of choosing battles wisely. As for Ethan, He found peace not just in solitude, but in the connections he'd forged along the way. His lakeside cabin remained his sanctuary, a place where he could retreat from the chaos of the world. But now, it also felt like a bridge of space where people came together to share laughter, stories, and memories. On quiet evenings, Ethan often sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The lake shimmered in the fading light, reflecting the colors of the sky. He thought about everything that had happened, the arguments, the fire, the rebuilding, and marveled at how much had changed. Life, he realized, was unpredictable. Sometimes it threw challenges your way that tested your patience, your principles, and your faith in humanity. But if you stayed true to yourself and surrounded yourself with good people, you could weather any storm. As the stars emerged one by one, twinkling like tiny lanterns above the water, Ethan leaned back in his chair and smiled. Whatever the future held, he knew he was ready. After all, owning the entire county wasn't just about land. It was about creating a place where everyone felt welcome. And in that moment, looking out at the beauty around him, Ethan knew he'd succeeded.